Hello, this is One Mana Left, and this is going to be my second video related to PoE 2. We are 1 month and 2 days away from the early access beta. And one thing that's being put together right now is, just like many people use PoEDB to look at data mined information and kind of get all their goods. It's like a better wiki for PoE 1. There's a PoE 2 DB, and it has 140 skill gems from PoE 2 so far. Now, to note here, these are not like something that's been data mined and is a complete list. They are missing a lot of spells. It's mainly attacks. I think all the Templar stuff is out. So this is only like probably like half or 60% of the gems, and it's mainly attacks. And they also don't have like level scaling. It's just snapshots. Like someone was doing a demo and playthrough, and they have a snapshot of Arc level 10. So like this is what we have. Some of them don't even have that info. They just have like a description with no actual gem tags. But still, there's trends you can see if you kind of ignore the numbers mostly. Just like seeing what's strong and seeing what looks interesting and kind of seeing the play styles they're sort of suggesting us to play. And I'm going to kind of just go through this and maybe talk about things that are significantly different than the same gem in PoE 1. And maybe look at the play styles that at least numerically look strong. So it's 140 gems. I'm not going to go through in like great detail on every single gem, but I'm just going to go through some of the interesting ones. First one up, Arctic Armor looks really good. Like it stacks up to 3 stages, and I think this even scales because I think they showed 4 stages in one of the demos, and I think this amount even scales too. So it gets to be a really big damage reduction. However, you lose a stage, like, am I reading this correctly? Okay. Removing a stage, but dealing less damage if you've been, okay, so, like, basically it gains stages over time, which is amazing if it stacks, but every single hit removes a stage. So if you're, unless you're fighting a gigantic boss that's the slowest monster in the game, this kind of sucks. So yeah, PoE 1 Arctic Armor is a very good defensive aura. It's probably the best 25% mana reservation you can get. But because any significant number of hits makes this completely worthless, this kind of sucks. Next thing I'm going to go to, armor breaking is something that's baked into a lot of skill gems. They're kind of adding, I mean, like in PoE 1, monsters and especially bosses have an amount of armor. This usually doesn't matter at all unless you're doing like some really ZDPS gauntlet character and you're fighting content that has significant damage reduction. But bosses do have armor in the game right now. It's just by the time you get to endgame, it's such an insignificant amount that like what's 30k armor on a boss do against a 1 million melee hit? Like pretty much nothing. I think the push in PoE 2 is that armor is going to be a more significant mechanic. And a lot of skills have some utility around them that is meant to basically peel away armor. So there's this armor breaker skill. There's like 5 to 10 others on the list that have some interaction with armor breaking. There's skills that get bonus abilities when a monster's armor has been fully broken. I guess just like my take on some of these is going to be not like the trailer gameplay, the campaign gameplay, but like I'm going to try to judge these from an actual end game usage. And I'm gonna just tell you right now that I think this mechanic is gonna suck. I think I see it going 2 ways. It'll look really cool in a trailer, like, oh, I'm shedding this boss's armor, or now he's taking more damage. Oh, now I can use my real skill and do damage to him. But the reality is, like, just a good build, it's not gonna matter. Like, to our understanding, the armor formula is the same. So the correct answer for dealing with monsters that have decent amounts of armor will be just doing more damage. So the alternative, the second outcome I see will be some of the skills that have bonus abilities for 0 armor monsters, like, oh, does 2.5 times damage on monsters that have no armor. Maybe that'll be strong. If there's a really, really good quality of life way with a second gem link setup to just kind of passively shed armor. But I think an active playstyle where you're expected to have like a link that's dedicated to like doing your first round of attacks to get rid of armor, and then another round. The only way that is like any use whatsoever is like bosses. You're never gonna use that on rares and stuff. So it's like it's already kind of a boss only mechanic. But Assuming armor works the same way as PoE1, it just gets completely negated by larger hits. So the answer is probably going to be just hit harder. Like, I know we don't know the tuning numbers yet, but I can almost promise you that all the armor shed mechanics that like try to be presented as some interactive gameplay to do like some crazy damage rotation, you're just gonna hit harder. I guarantee it. So we'll see. We'll see if I'm wrong. But yeah. Next, if you guys haven't really followed the changes to Reservation, in PoE1, Reservation reserves your mana. Players get 100% mana, and this has changed a lot over the years, but in the current iteration of PoE1, you just have the 100% mana or life reservation, and then you get reservation efficiency. So how that works is if you have 100% increased reservation efficiency, it's effectively like you have 200% mana to work with. So if Determination reserves 50 and Purity of Elements reserves 50, well, with no reservation efficiency, that reserves 100% of your mana, but with 100% reservation efficiency, that reserves 50% of your mana. It's pretty similar, but a little different to the way that Spirit works, because Spirit is its own thing, and it's how you reserve like auras and cool passive effects. We know that it's around 100 Spirit, I think you get as like a max level character, and there's some you get throughout the campaign, but I don't know if the throughout the campaign gained Spirit is what gets you to 100, or if it's somehow tied to level, and you can get over 100. But I think roundabouts, they expect players to have like 100-ish base Spirit, and then have different sources to get increased numbers. So once again, we don't know for sure until we see it on beta in a month, but I'm expecting your typical player is going to have around 200 Spirit of like a high-ish investment character. So I think as far as like planning out auras to use, or as reservation effects to use, I think basically it's going to be balanced around about 200, would be my guess. But a lot of them suck. A lot of them just really suck. Blasphemy, though, is really good looking. Because Blasphemy in PoE1 reserves 32 to 35% mana. Whereas, and it has reduced curse effect. This, as far as we can tell, does not have any reduced curse effect. We don't know what the gem level scaling does, so maybe it does, but because some of these are incomplete. But as far as I can tell, Blasphemy looks really good. Most of the marks suck. They changed marks to not be permanent, and they look incredibly weak. So in like the curse family, marks look really bad. But curses, we don't have hard numbers yet, but a lot of them seem unchanged. So they could be numerically much worse, but assuming they're anything close to their power, like temp chains and stuff in PoE1 and in Feeble, I'm going to say right now, based off these numbers, that a 30 Spirit Reservation Blasphemy Curse, especially if there's no downscaling on curse effect, is going to be one of the best ways to reserve Spirit. One other point, too, on Spirit is, as far as it being functionally really similar to just current mana with res efficiency, one significant difference with it being its own stat is mana stackers. Because mana stackers right now want to naturally unreserve all of their mana, because that's how Archmage scales. That's, it has positive effects with Mana Forged Arrows, stuff like that. And you can't really get auras. This is kind of like a big detriment to mana stackers, is that like pretty much every build in the game gets baked in like 3 auras that they use, and then mana stackers just don't get that. Like Eternal Blessing was a big boon to mana stackers because now we basically get 1 aura, but it kind of forces mana stackers into low life just to get a 2nd or 3rd aura, and it's just having a whole separate stat that is independent of mana, so that you can be a mana stacker and get the same reservation effects as every other build, is going to be really good. Now, maybe mana stackers suck completely. We'll see some of their skills in a little bit. But the split between Spirit and mana is a huge... It frees up a lot of design space for like a mana stacking archetype. But a lot of skills they look the same or similar, but we don't have like hard numbers on anything. But the next section, these skills, in my opinion, just as a first impression, are by far the most fun looking, and I think personally have the most potential to be completely broken. Like starting off, cast on crit, okay, 100 Spirit. So with a no investment character, that's like your whole pool. And then you see gain 10 energy when you deal a critical strike. And then once you get to maximum energy, we don't know what maximum is. Maybe it scales with gem level. Let's just say it's 100. Once you get to maximum energy, then it triggers all linked skills. Now, a lot of people I think have looked at this and thought that, oh, isn't this just like way worse than current cast on crit? Because current cast on crit, it's real simple. You crit, and then it casts, and then it's got a quarter-second cooldown. This seems way worse because it's going to take like, what, 10 plus crits to trigger? Well, I think these actually have some potential for some extreme abuse in like an endgame build. And the reason for that, there's a couple reasons. First, as far as we can see, there is no cooldown. Now, just picture some juiced endgame gameplay in PoE1, and just imagine how many crits you can do a second on, like, you know, just surrounded by monsters on, like, just some screen spam skill. How many crits do you think you're doing in a second? I'd venture to say I could break 5,000 on, like, just about any build I've played in the last 2 years. So, even if it took a big number of crits, the fact it doesn't have a cooldown is, I think, really abusable with some fast-hitting skills, because it also doesn't give less or more energy depending on the size of the hit. So, a skill right now that is like an Earthquake skill that just does one hit, versus like a Rain of Arrows of Saturation that does 50 hits per hit, like, they all give 10 energy. So, I think there's some extreme potential for abuse in this archetype. The second thing that's a really big note for kind of all skills, but especially for these, is a lot of the effects. This is kind of a common theme in the PoE2 skill gems we've seen so far. In PoE1, there are links that require being linked to your main skill. So like cast on crit in PoE1 needs to be part of a 6-link with the skill that's triggering it. So if you're using Cyclone cast on crit, you need to have Cyclone linked to cast on crit, and then you have 4 support gems left to actually do damage. This is global. This is not like it needs to be linked to an attack skill. It's global. So they're really pushing having a bunch of 6-links in PoE2, which I think is way cooler from like build design standpoint and just gameplay overall. But instead of just having like the core theme of PoE1 that like you have your one main 6-link and that's how you play the whole game is just dealing with everything with that one 6-link. Instead in PoE2, they're really pushing for you to have like 2 to 4 links that are dedicated to damage, I would say. Like you have a main skill, and then you have 1 to 3 different link setups that are supporting that main skill. So in this case, you might have your main skill, and it might be trying to do as many hits as possible, a lot of attack speed, a lot of hits, 100% crit, whatever. And then the cast on crit doesn't have to be linked to that. It's its own separate link. And then here's where it gets a little more broken, I think. It's not attacks. It doesn't specify at all. It can be spells. You can trigger cast on crit with spells. Okay? And then here's where it gets even more broken. The spells that the cast on crit trigger, there is no mention that they are restricted from gaining energy for cast on crit itself. So you can trigger a bunch of skills that gain energy that can trigger themselves. Okay? Well, now you might be thinking, ooh, this is starting to sound kind of ward loopy. We'd have to see the numbers, we have to see how much energy, but like, I'm with you now. Alright, well, it could get more broken. Hear me out. You have no restriction on how many of these you can run, aside from your spirit reservation. So let's say you have 200 spirit, and you want to go with cast on crit and cast on shock. Let's say all the spells linked, and then your third link, which is your main damage setup, let's say they're mainly lightning skills, or have lightning damage, and they can all shock. So your main skill, the cast on crit triggers, and the cast on shock triggers, can all shock and can all crit and feed into each other. And really, whether it's the same energy or separate energy doesn't really seem to make too much of a difference, as long as there's even like a slight time delay on such a loop. So you could basically have 3 6 links of damage, where it's your primary link, a cast on crit link, I cast on Shock Link, and just trigger some ward loop-esque loop that just does crazy stuff. The only thing here is, to my knowledge, each trigger will spend mana. And I think that's kind of a recurring theme on a lot of these setups, is they all, as far as I can tell, spend mana. All these trigger effects, all these skills, even a lot of the attack skills seem to have really high mana costs. So I think mana is going to be a bit of a problem for pretty much every build in PoE 2. I think they really want people to either invest in mana or use mana potions. I think the PoE 1 playstyle, people just having like 2 rings with minus mana cost and being fine, I think that's going away. And I think even this last patch, we've seen a lot of the mana cost of attack skills go up to kind of push people away from that. And there's been a lot of melee skills this league have mana problems with the rework. I think that's like a soften the blow change, because I think it's going to be a worse problem in PoE 2. So I think mana is going to be a problem across the board. But a loop build like this would have such an extreme mana problem that, based off what I've seen for some of the mana gems, I think people's idea of like what a mana stacker type build in PoE 1 is something that directly scales and depends on a mana pool like Archmage. But I think that definition might blur a little bit in PoE 2, because I think across the board mana is going to be such a huge problem that doing any just extreme loot build like this will spend so much mana that it's kind of a mana stacker build without any mana scaling. Like none of the spells that are doing damage will be scaling off your mana pool. But the number of spells you can cast to loop on a target or a full AoE scenario is probably going to be directly dependent on how much mana you have. So like I actually could see like a double cast on setup being a mana stacker, like a de facto mana stacker build, even though the scaling does not depend its damage on your mana pool. But we'll see, but I see some prime targets for abuse with this archetype. This is, of all the gems we've seen so far, my brain immediately goes to what's the most broken thing you can do with this. My brain immediately goes to these gems. I see some extreme abuse possible. Like in fact, I think we'll see some of these go in beta, and I think a lot of this probably won't go live, but we'll see. There's no cap on anything there. Next up, as far as the trigger setups, some of them, like cast on crit, it does not specify that there's any penalty for a slow cast time, because naturally, if you have a trigger, you want it to be the biggest, hardest hitting hit possible, because it's not given a cast time, it just triggers. So if you had to trigger a skill that has a 0.1 second cast time and deals 10 damage, or trigger a skill that has a 10-second cast time and does 1,000 damage, obviously you'd want to trigger the bigger skill. And one of these such skills is Comet, and it has a 1-second cast time, which a lot of skills actually do, but it's got a plus 1 second cast time, so it's 2 seconds total. But we don't actually know if this can be reduced by cast speed. It's weird that it would be worded differently. Like, for example, in PoE 1, Leap Slam... Oh, wrong setup. But, like, Leap Slam the gem in PoE 1... It's in my off sockets here, right? Leap Slam says plus 0.55 second attack time. But that's still reducible by attack speed. Because if you'll see here, my attack time is 0.3 seconds. So, like, clearly it's reducible below that 0.5. So if it was consistent the way it worked with PoE 1, this would still be reducible, and there wouldn't really be much of a point specifying it differently. But I tend to think that's not how it works, because otherwise it would make no sense to make it a separate line of text. So I tend to think the cast time is reducible by your cast speed, but that the plus 1 second is not. But it's a real prime target for trigger gems. And some of them have an extra line of text just to kind of counter this that says, basically it's plus 10 max energy per 0.1 second of cast time. So a 2-second cast would be an extra 200 energy to trigger. This kind of balances out that hypothetical scenario of the hard-hitting skill versus the soft-hitting skills, because cheaper cast times will have a cheaper energy cost, but slower, hard-hitting stuff will have more energy. Now, that is kind of cool, because right now, like a lot of trigger setups like cast on crit, they're limited by the cooldown of the skill, and the only way to get more is to really get more cooldown reduction. You're not really limited by attack time, and cast speed has no effect whatsoever, with the exception of things like Lightning Conduit and Frostbite Wintry Blast, which people don't really play as triggers for those exact reasons. But pretty much every trigger skill is going to work roughly like that. So it does mean that a build that runs a trigger setup can still get cast speed as a beneficial mod, because cast speed in that scenario is effectively CDR. It will trigger more frequently by you having cast speed. So like that's kind of cool. It's an extra scaling vector for trigger setups. So I think skills like Comet being big, slow, dummy skills are still going to be the best setup for trigger setups. But yeah, you can scale cast speed to amplify the triggers. We've seen curses, but we don't have hard numbers, so it's really hard to say. Contagion looks insanely strong. It's basically exactly like PoE 1, where it spreads all chaos dots. But damage is increased 100% for each debuff up to 300%. So really, it does full damage on the first target. Like your full single target damage, it's done on the first target. And then if it jumps 3 times, it's already doing, like, it's increased. I don't think this is more damage. So it's doing 300% increased damage, though, by the third jump. So, like, I think Chaos Dot Contagion is going to be insane clear speed. Like, people are, right now in PoE 1, Chaos Dot skills suck because they just don't have many directions for scaling. But PoE 1's really power crept right now. I think just it's hard to say for sure, but just based off some of the things we've seen and just the pattern of scaling throughout, like, the development of a game, I tend to think Chaos Dot's going to be really strong on launch because most skills don't have any of the crazy scaling we have in PoE 1. So they're really just tied down to what's the base damage on the gem. And I think if that's balanced across the board, Chaos Dot having really smooth playstyle with Contagion spreading and like just giga AoE, I think Contagion's going to be like one of the best mapper setups. Unless it just has 0 single target and mapping sucks because bosses have a ton of HP. That's the only scenario I don't see Chaos Dot being good. A lot of these skills are the same. I'm going to kind of skip through them. But one theme we've seen is that charges in PoE 2 are a little different now. In PoE 1, charges are basically just like a static buff on your character. In PoE 2, they are a currency to do extreme numbers. There's a lot of skills out there that have effects when they consume a charge. And across the board, most of these effects are insane. So any skill I've seen so far that generates charges, I've automatically not written off because we don't really know how hard it will be to generate charges. But based off seeing some of these numbers, charge generation is worth its weight in gold. Like, look at this skill, okay? It's a slow skill, 60% attack speed base, 147% damage. Okay, that's not that crazy. Most of the skills, though, are somewhere between, if you take the attack speed and the damage effectiveness and multiply them together, most of the skills in this list are between 70 and 120. So automatically, this skill is like not amazing, right? So it's 0.6 times 147. It's 88, like a little bit in the middle, maybe below average versus the rest of the list. But 300% more damage per power charge. Oh, but there's more. It does 3 additional projectiles per power charge. Okay. And the projectiles deal 300% more. It's a squared mechanic. So if you consume 4 power charges, not only do you do 13 times damage, but you fire 12 projectiles that do 13 times damage. So one charge would be 3 proj, 4 times damage. 6 power charges would be 18 projectiles that do 19 times damage. I don't know if this can shotgun or have some sort of return mechanics or whatever, but like, this is an example of charge consumption being just head and shoulders above everything else in terms of damage effectiveness. If you have any like reliable source of charge generation, there's about 5 to 15, it's probably like 10 to 15 skills like this. And they all do just insane numbers. Another one of those is Flicker Strike. Flicker Strike, like we said, the numbers look okay because it's, 0.5 times 354, 177%. It's already better than your average skill. But consumes power charges to perform additional teleporting strikes with 285% more attack speed, 3 additional per. So once again, if you consumed 5 power charges, you would do 15 additional hits at 4 times speed. Like, charge generation on charge consumption skills is just crazy numbers. The only way these suck is if it's just impossible to get charges. If there's anything that's charge on kill, these skills are going to be just absolute apex predators for mapping. Maybe they'll suck on bosses. But if there's ways to generate reliable charges on single target for bosses, they'll be good for those too. If your build is strong enough that you're doing content that can clear maps with relative ease, and then the only thing that really has a formidable amount of HP is the boss. If you have like on-kill charge generation of some sort, and you can have like 6 power charges going into a boss, if you can kill it with one falling thunder, like maybe you can get 18 projectiles to shotgun. If you can kill it with one falling thunder, that is going to be an apex predator build. But we'll have to test and see just how extensive charge generation is. I'm not sure. I would tend to think it's going to be extremely hard because we haven't seen too many charge generation skills here. And obviously, they can't be this strong and be as easy as PoE 1 for charge generation, but we'll see. It looks pretty good. There's a lot of bear stuff. That's pretty much all the information we have for Druid forms is just bear stuff. It looks okay, but I think it's too hard to judge without, seeing anything seeing live gameplay. Hammer of the Gods is a really interesting gem because I like skills like this. We don't have many skills like this in PoE 1. It's a ridiculously long cooldown. And this skill just does fuck you damage. It's remember when I said that all the skills in this list are between 70 and 120% damage effectiveness? Like after multiplied by attack speed? Yeah, this skill does 1307. Can't be evaded. 2.5 meter radius. That's a skill. But it's 24-second cooldown. I like this though because it's a real passive, easy gameplay to have, like, your main damage setup, but then just have, like, it's like having your ult, you know? You just have your big button that you can press every 24 seconds. I actually really like that, because we're going to have an overabundance of links compared to PoE 1. You're going to have, like I said, probably 2 to 4 sets of links dedicated to damage. I think just having one link being a Hammer of the Gods type button to take out rares and bosses is actually pretty fun. Somewhere there's some footage of this, but I don't have it handy on me. A lot of the aura reservation we've seen has been really weak. Heralds look incredibly strong comparatively. They all reserve only 30 spirit, which, like I said, if we're assuming a player has about 200, that's a 15% reservation. And they're pretty much as strong or even slightly stronger than PoE 1, which a lot of things in PoE 2 that we've seen so far are not. And remember, a lot of these gems are like level 1 to 10 because they're from campaign info. But it's 15 of damage is extra fire, but it's all damage. If you're dealing a fireball that does 100% fire damage, this still makes it do 15% more damage. Damage conversion works different in PoE 2. It's not pure Fizz to Ellie, and it's not multi-conversion, and the damage increased of the two types doesn't scale. Only the end damage scales. But, so damage effectiveness, damage conversion across the board works differently in PoE 2. But a lot of the old things in PoE 1 that had Fizzes extra are just generic damage conversion, which is really strong. So now, Herald of Ash isn't just some, like, Fizzes extra fire support. It could actually be used in just a full lightning build. It could be, like, it's all damage converted, 15 extra, and then you still get the overkill effect. There is a weird mechanic they've added here that I'm not really... I mean, it says sufficiently overkill, and then it says at least 20% of the life for overkill. I actually don't understand the reasoning behind this other than game performance. That they don't want to spread a 3% overkill just for performance. But for me, this is odd that, like, this is one of the places that they start adding performance issues. When they routinely and even recently keep adding things to the game that just butcher the performance. Like, last league, they added a tier 17 map mod that makes you do no damage for 3 seconds every 10. And it was 4 last league and scaled with map mod effect up to like 7 or 8. If you've ever gone to a Divine Shrine or an enemies cannot die scenario with a build that does a lot of hits, you know it pretty much brings the world server to its knees. Like, it is like the single worst performance thing in the game to just have invulnerable monsters with a really fast hitting build. So, like, I have a pretty good PC. I have a 3080 graphics card on a $2,300 PC. And that 3-second invulnerable mod, it basically crashes my game almost, like, on enough monsters. So, like, it's just weird to me that they keep adding new stuff to PoE 1. That the only thing it really does is just guts your performance. And then, like, the first thing they add to try to, like, take a step back, the spot they draw the line is the Herald of Ashburn, which I imagine is not very calculation or graphics intensive. I just think this is weird. I don't disagree with it. I just think it's weird that this is where, like, the first case I've seen of it having a line drawn. Herald Thunder is also extremely good. As far as I can tell, this just gives you 100% Fizz to Lightning, period. I instinctively, I thought that this was like some of its own damage being converted to Lightning, but it's not Fizz-based at all. I'm pretty sure this skill just gives you 100% Fizz to Lightning. Once again, damage conversion is different, but I think that it's either damage conversion is just free everywhere and this is weak, or if this was just applied to PoE1 logic, this is actually pretty strong. Let's see here. Then the next most interesting ones, there's a lot of crossbow shot skills. That's kind of like the bear gems. I think that's one where we really need to see it to really judge it. I don't think we can really judge those off just raw numbers. As a rule of thumb, the crossbow skills have a little bit better damage effectiveness than the other skills, probably like 30 to 50% higher. But then some of them have like reload time, and I don't know how bad that is to play. So it seems like they're overstated for damage to compensate for the reload. Which I guess like kind of makes sense. You do like a burst of high damage, and then you have to. I think we'll have to see it to really make any real opinions. But there's the generic theme is all the crossbow skills do a little bit better than average damage, and then have like some reload mechanic most of the time. Mana Remnants I think is really interesting as far as mana skills because it basically just gives you a buff. It's a 30 spirit buff. It's just passive. There's not an active skill. This is just passive. Everything you kill drops a mana shard, so it's just like it drops gold. And you pick it up and it gives you mana. That's pretty good, especially if we talk about a lot of builds having mana problems. And it goes over your maximum mana. That's the interesting effect. So if you have 500 mana, and these all drop 20 mana from like let's say you have a level 10 one of these and it's 20 mana per shard, and you go kill a pack of monsters and they drop 25 crystals, you would pick them all up and you would be at 1,000 out of 500 mana now. So I think this will actually be really strong for sustain for mapping on skills that on like builds that have like an unsustainable mana cost. It won't work on bosses really, but if it goes over cap up to double the normal amount, like if 2 times your full mana pool is enough to kill a boss, then this kind of solves your sustain. But we haven't really seen any mana mechanic spells that scale like Archmage. Like for Archmage, you know, Archmage deals damage based off your unreserved mana. So something like this for Archmage could make it do like double damage in theory, but I haven't seen any mechanics like that are abusable where maximum mana directly gives you more damage. But I suspect there will be something where the going over maximum effect is significant, but I just haven't seen it yet. It's just, remember, we haven't seen any of the Templar skills. We've only seen most of the like attack skills. Mana Tempest was shown off in the Exile Con demo playthrough. It's kind of like a Rune of Power if you ever played Mage in World of Warcraft, Doc Leave. But it basically puts a rune on the ground and you stand in it and you get some extra effects. It gives you Chain, it gives you Fork, and it gives you a little bit of extra lightning extra damage as lightning. All damage though. So if you're using a lightning skill, it's just 58% more damage. I don't think this is that good because it's just going to ramp the spend up to an unsustainable amount really fast. And unlike a lot of the PoE 1 mana mechanics, doing so does not increase your damage at all. So you only really get the damage for a little while, and then you have to move out of the rune and recast the rune. And I think this is like just tedious enough that it's probably not that good. Because once again, ramping it higher and like upping your sustain to be able to stay in the rune longer is actually of no benefit to you. You don't do more damage the longer you're in the rune. If that was the case, that'd be cool. Just like get some crazy mana stacker with all this mana sustain. But the other thing is it's percent mana. It's not even a flat mana that it burns. It's percent mana. So stacking mana doesn't even really help you. Like some build that has really low mana but really high sustain. Like, you know, picture an aura stacker that just has like a level 21 clarity with 300 effect. So they have 500 regen, but then they only have 500 mana. Like those type of builds would be really strong for this, but like an actual mana stacker wouldn't be that good. So I think It's an interesting looking skill, but I think the gain is pretty minimal. It's got a cast. It's not even an instant cast. It's not even like just like, oh, drop a rune on me. It's a 0.6 second cast, and then you can't like. I just think this like maybe looks kind of cool for a trailer, but I think it's just like too cancerous to play. I don't think this is it. If I'm eyeballing some mana stacker builds for PoE 2, I don't think this is it. We'll have to see. A couple other notes. There's a lot of skills, just generically speaking, that have baked in movement. So I'm gonna make just kind of like a hot take prediction, but if in this list there's like 15 skills that they deal damage, it's usually a little bit lower damage than like a real skill, and they have baked in movement. I think, I mean, these are effectively just our move skills, but their whole damage profile is pointless. Because, like, you're never going to play a build that's using a skill with baked in movement as your main skill. If you've ever played, like, when I get a knockback shrine in PoE 1, I immediately have to take it off. Because having my main skill push enemies away from me is just, like, way too annoying to play. So every time I get a brutal shrine, I click it off. It's too annoying. But then imagine the opposite of that is even worse. Moving your character every skill is terrible. Like imagine having to roll sideways every time you use your main skill. Like, so for sure these skills are not going to be main skills. They're just not. Like, not even from a damage number standpoint, just from a play style standpoint, you would never want to play that. And the other thing too is I think these skills are just like trailer bait, where they look really cool when you see a level 17 character use it in Act 2. But, like, what does that look like on a level 97 character that has 6 attacks per second? It's just like auto epilepsy. You're never going to use that. Like, they're pretty much limited to only being movement skills, but like ultimately you would just want to have a skill that moved. Like, you don't care about the damage. You just want leap slam. You just want lightning warp. You just want frostblink. Having like some weird movement profile where it's just like moves backwards, rolls forward, dodge sideways, moves 2 spaces forward and 1 space to either side. The bishop can move that is going to be so annoying. Like, you would rather just have a skill that moved where you wanted to move as your movement skill. You don't care about the damage it does. And at high attack and cast speed, those are going to be terrible to play. So I think this is just trailer bait, where all these skills are there to look attractive in an Act 2 playthrough on a level 17 character, because I think they're really targeting like the Dark Souls crowd, who likes a good rolling session where they just roll sideways for 10 minutes. I think they want to bring that crowd into Path of Exile, and showing skills like that in teasers looks attractive. But I think in actual endgame gameplay, it's just like, it's probably terrible. I think you're just going to find whichever skill is the closest to current Leap Slam or Lightning Warp or Frostblink, and just use only that skill. I think the other stuff will just be like, it'll be cool a few times, and then the 10th time it won't be as cool, and then the 100th time it will be really not cool, and then by the 1000th time you'll have deleted the gem. So yeah, I think it'll just be a mission to find whatever's the closest to a direct teleport skill, and then everyone will use that if it exists. And if such a skill does not exist, everyone will be really pissed off who's gotten used to that playstyle in PoE 1, and they won't actually be even remotely usable as main skills regardless of damage. I do think, just like as some general notes here, one thing that I think is cool is just the fact that a lot of the pushed playstyle, it seems, from these gems is pushing you to have like I said, probably 2 to 4 links that are dedicated to damage. The good news there is it's your main link mostly, it seems, and then secondary effects that are passive. It seems like you can have 2 skills that are active. There are some play styles that are going to have 3 or 4 skills that are active that actually do like a rotation, and some players like that. But I think like if you have some setup where you're gonna go up to a rare monster and you're gonna sit there and you're gonna like attack it and then you're gonna peel its armor off, armor pierce, armor pierce, armor pierce. Okay, now its armor's gone. Okay, now we can hit it harder with this skill, which is gonna set it up for a stun. And then after I stun it, it gets vulnerable to a critical stun or heavy stun, whatever. Now that I heavy stun it, I can like, do like this weird combo freeze, and then that makes this skill hit harder. And then my fifth skill comes in, and it's gonna just like, even weirder stun. And like, by the time you've done all that, a good build is at the boss. Like, I don't care what the like PoE2's Ruthless crowd is saying, because they've only watched Act 2 gameplay on characters that were using exclusively one link gray items. Because, if you watch Crip's Exile playthrough, within 20 minutes, he had a 4-link rare weapon and was one-shotting rares in Act 2. Good builds are going to exist, and by the time you go through that whole rotation, a good build is going to be at the boss. So I think, like, the like, 4 active skill, like, Argentinian stun, just, like, reverse freeze, like, all that bullshit is going to just be terrible. Like, it'll look cool for a trailer. Maybe on long boss fights there will be use for that. But, like, for the most part, I think a good build will just annihilate that and not have to do any of that. That is my prediction. Maybe I'm jaded by power in PoE 1, but I tend to think that won't be the case. I tend to think once things get figured out, we figure out what skills are good, what links are good, how to build a good character. I think all that, like, weird combo skill play where it's multiple active skills to set up different effects is gone. You're not going to do that. But I do like the push for the playstyle of you have your main skill and then you have like 1 to 3 links that passively do something based off your main skill doing something. So you're still just using the main skill, but now you have those 2 to 4 total gem links that are dedicated to your damage profile. And, maybe it adds complexity to it. That's passive. It sounds almost like an oxymoron, but, like, you have trigger effects. You have, like, we'll have to see some gameplay. But I think having just, like, a main skill with a arsenal of passive extra effects and other links is going to be pretty good. And I think that's going to be the preferred playstyle. Like, I guess I'll just add one final detail to that. In PoE 1, I've played a lot of builds recently, not anymore, that used a weapon swap to Battle Mage's Cry. And, like, for example, they'd have, like, your main Mana Forged Arrows skill here, and then you would weapon swap, use a War Cry. So you'd be doing damage, you'd weapon swap, War Cry, weapon swap back, and go back to doing damage, and you gotta do that every 12 seconds, okay? Doing that made my character do, I'm not exaggerating this number, 30 times damage. Okay. A half-second swap every 12 seconds. 12 seconds goes by, swap, boom, we're back. Half a second every 12 seconds. And it made you do 30 times damage. And I had people, probably half the player base, tell me they would never play that build because of the swap. So seeing some of these gems, like lay down your Mana Tempest, stand in your Mana Tempest, peel the boss. If people won't do a half-second weapon swap every 12 seconds for 30 times damage, if that's a disqualifier for a build, they're not going to do that for 58% damage for 3 seconds. I can promise you. It might look cool in a trailer. It might be cool 2 or 3 times while you're progressing through the acts. An actual build, nobody is going to want to do that. I have got first-hand experience of people, like, spitting in the face of 30 times damage because of a minor inconvenience. The inconveniences that some of these gems bring is much more than minor. So I think all those playstyles, unless they do absurd damage, are not going to be played. But I think a lot of the passive link playstyles, like the cast on effects, I think are going to be really cool. That's probably what I'm going to try to play first. But we got, it's October 13th right now, and it will be November 15th. We have early access beta. So I roughly know what I'm going to be targeting first. I think I have a good idea for what's going to be broken. But then there's other things where it's just kind of question mark. We don't know. But we'll see. I'll see you guys next time.